So there is no UFC on this weekend, but there is going to be a pretty big PFL card that I have already broken down on my channel, as well as LFA 200 Johns versus Douglas. This card is going to be broadcast on UFC Fight Pass at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday night, which is going to be a pretty good time, kind of around the time that the UFC would be broadcast anyway. So if you wanted to watch some pretty high level MMA, I would recommend checking out this card. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, I'm only breaking down the main card, and by the main card, I'm only breaking down the final 5 fights of this card. I just am flat out with work at the moment. I'm working, obviously, in roofing, and the deadline for the job to be finished is next Friday. And we were 3 weeks behind schedule last week. So we're working a lot at the moment, so I'm just very tired, and I'm only going to break down the 5 fights. Plus, I did spend a lot of time looking into the PFL and the UFC, but I'll do my UFC breakdown this weekend at the normal time. The first fight on the main card, though, of course, is Devon Lozej versus Enrique Pacheco Parra. If you want to find tape on Enrique Pacheco, just search up Enrique Pacheco. I couldn't find anything by searching the full name here, but pretty much what this is a grappler versus grappler matchup. Pacheco does have 7 wins by submission, and the majority of those wins actually do come by defensive submission, whether that be in triangle or even a guillotine, which he did get in his most recent fight. But it was interesting because he set up the guillotine in his last fight by catching his opponent with a head kick. But I wouldn't say that Pacheco looks very comfortable on the feet at all, and it also doesn't really look like he has much takedown defense at all either. And he also looks to be a pretty small flyweight despite being listed at 5'7", which is pretty tall for the weight class. Lozej, I was actually quite impressed with him. Now, especially considering I actually hadn't heard of Lozej before, I would like to see him in the Contender Series if he could get this win, especially Pacheco, if he can get this win as well. He should be on the Contender Series, but Lozej looked good to me. This guy is a constant wrestler. He doesn't really have like the most super exciting style for flyweight, but he does look very comfortable in the striking. His striking looked quite good. He's got good reactions, good defense, and he's also got pretty decent finishing ability. Plus, in this matchup in particular, he looks a lot more comfortable in the striking than Parra does. Parra does look a little bit slow, a little bit of a step behind against a lot of the opponents that he has been fighting. So I'm going to pick Devon Lozej to win this matchup. Now, I don't know if he's going to get a finish, but I'm just going to pick Lozej to win by decision. But I think that he should be on the Contender Series this year because he is nearly 32 years old now. And I think that he would be a pretty fun addition to the roster if he could get through a Contender Series fighter. Now, Lozej is minus 300, and that is pretty wide. I think Pacheco is going to always have a chance to get the sub, but I do think Lozej does win the matchup. Now we can move up to the next one. I think this is actually a really good fight for Joey Hart. Now, of course, Joey Hart was on the Contender Series. He lost to Benjamin Bennett. It was a pretty fun fight. I thought the decision, I think some people found it pretty controversial. Now, as with a lot of the split decisions on the Contender Series, I actually did typically agree with a lot of the judges, and I actually did think that Benjamin Bennett won that fight, but I do understand a lot of people strongly disagree with me on that one. But Joey Hart, to talk about him, he actually is a very fun fighter to watch at welterweight. He does genuinely have an Alex Caceres, Sean O'Malley type of just dynamic, fluid striking style to him at 6'3", at 170 pounds. You just don't really see that much, and I think that if Joey Hart could get a win here, and then maybe another win, I would love to see him on the Contender Series, because I think he would be a lot of fun in the UFC. And the reason why I say that this is a pretty good matchup for him is because Chris Mixan is a boxer, and he seems to be like a pretty basic boxer. I'll be honest with you, in his most recent fight against Tristan Vines, you can watch this on YouTube, and in that matchup, he just kind of has his hands up like this, and he doesn't really show very good movement, which is really odd, because in his PFL fight, he genuinely did show pretty good movement. And what I mean by that is Vines was a wrestler, so Vines actually did beat him in the wrestling, but on the feet, Vines was landing quite a bit. Mixon wasn't really defending shots too well, I didn't find. And then against Stegenberg, you know how PFL does the live odds and they show on the graphic? In the final 10 seconds of the fight, Stegenberg was a minus 700 favorite going into the decision. The commentators even said that Stegenberg was about to take Mixon's O, and the judges gave it to Mixan. Now, of course, judges in the PFL notoriously in the past have just been absolutely terrible. I feel like Clay Collard's entire PFL career can explain that. But Stegenberg was a 6'5" striker. He wasn't really that dynamic, but he found a lot of success fighting from range and a lot of success with kicks. He outlanded Mixan in kicks like 44-10 or something. It was unbelievable. I think that Hart can kind of just do the same thing that Stegenberg did, but with just a little bit more pop, with a little bit more urgency, and I think just kind of a little bit more entertainment, really, because Hart is a fun fighter to watch. Hart can grapple. There are videos on his YouTube channel of him grappling, but I don't think that his takedown defense is fantastic, which is why I did actually pick Bennett. But I think that Hart can go out there and beat Mixan here. It's a striker versus striker matchup. The much more dynamic striker is Joey Hart, and I do think that he can win this one. Now, Mixan could catch him. Joey Hart's defense isn't amazing, but I do feel like Benjamin Bennett kind of did present a tougher test for him than Mixan's going to, and we saw Hart nearly get that decision win there. So I'm going to pick Hart. He's minus 225. I think that this is a pretty good matchup for him to go out there and get a win. Now, Vanilto Antunes is now going to be fighting against the interim champion, Shamidkhan Magomedov. Antunes is the champion of LFA. Yes, he's coming off a loss, but that was on the Contender Series. He won the belt against Gerardo Neto by knocking him out. Shamidkhan Magomedov has become the interim champion and has actually been pretty active since winning the belt, because he actually defended the title after being on the Ultimate Fighter himself. And honestly, I think you should give Omran Shaban a title shot if Shamidkhan Magomedov is able to get it done, which I think he does do. Vanilto Antunes is a striker, but he just kind of likes to throw down. He does land with a lot of power, but he doesn't really have good defense. And I kind of just picked Islam Dulatov with a lot of confidence because I don't think that Antunes is that level. And Shamidkhan Magomedov has proven that he is. Magomedov's kind of interesting to me because I would actually say that he's mostly a striker, yet he can wrestle. It's kind of hard to explain because he just doesn't shoot for takedowns as often as you would expect. Now, he did get a first round knockout over Alfonso Leyva, but he didn't shoot for a takedown in that, didn't show any intention of doing that. But then against Bakhramanjom Mashrapov started that fight with a flying knee, instantly turned into some wrestling, and the whole fight was wrestling. And in that one, we actually saw a lot of grappling out of Magomedov. He went for a leg lock, he was controlling on top, he went for an arm triangle towards the end of the fight in the third round. So we know that Magomedov can wrestle quite well, we just don't really see it that much. And if the fight's on the feet, Antunes is going to be live for a KO, but I think if Magomedov decides to wrestle, it's going to be over. Antunes doesn't know how to grapple at all. In fact, I think Magomedov probably just takes him down and either ground and pounds him out or submits him in the first round. He's minus 600. Massive odds. Shannon Clark is now fighting Cheyenne Bowers. I personally am not really expecting too much out of this fight, to be honest, because these two are both wrestlers, and Shannon Clark just isn't that fun. And I actually did pick her to beat Eunice Dubin. She was like minus 1200, so of course I did. But Clark wins her fights by just clinching up against the cage. And that's kind of it. That's all she really does. She does have a lot of strength. And what I was looking for in Cheyenne Bowers was, if I was going to pick Cheyenne Bowers to win this fight, was, is she going to be able to match that size and strength that Shannon Clark has? And I think the answer is yes. They're both 5'5", but they are both very muscular fighters for women's flyweight. And Cheyenne Bowers, from what I've seen, looks a lot more comfortable in the striking. Now, she did get dropped by Veronica Borisova, but then instantly submitted her with the armbar. But her boxing looks a lot better. Shannon Clark, I mean, we saw it on the Contender Series, just plods forward and just doesn't do anything. So, I think if the wrestling cancels out, which it might, Bowers just is going to throw more volume. I think it's as simple as that, so I'm going to pick her to win the fight. I will be honest with you guys, just given this fighting style matchup, it really could end up being not the most fun fight, but Bowers is minus 215. And now we move up to the main event. This is where things get very interesting because I'm picking the underdog in Lerryan Douglas. Now, I'll be honest, I was expecting to pick Elijah Johns. Johns is a guy I've been aware of for a while now, but styles make fights, and I think Lerryan Douglas does actually have a pretty solid chance to go out there and knock out Elijah Johns. Lerryan Douglas has been in the LFA for a while now, but I think he's been pulling off a lot of upsets because I think that the LFA potentially was expecting to be able to build prospects off of his name, and they haven't been able to do that. Yes, he lost to the Australian Isaac Thompson, who's a pretty good prospect himself to keep your eye out for. He's pretty good, but After that, he knocked out Ivan Tenner, who has been fighting kind of around the place. I think he fought a UFC fighter in Combate. Give me a sec. This is going to annoy me. Roberto Ramiro's in the UFC now. Anyway, Nathan Garib knocked him out in the second round. Javier Reyes knocked him out in the second round. Very impressive performance there. But in these fights, he does three things very well. Defends takedowns, pushes his opponents forward, and then knocks them out. It's kind of as simple as that, and I think that he can do that to Elijah Johns, and I'll talk about why in a second. Against Ivan Tenner, the fight's kind of odd because Douglas actually initiated a wrestling sequence, which led to him getting a takedown. But then he knocked out Tenner, one punch KO, quite impressive. Against Nathan Garib, I was a little bit less impressed by this performance because Garib was able to pressure him forward and pressure him, but eventually he did finish him, of course, because that's what Douglas does. Douglas pushes forward, he puts your back against the cage, and then he kind of goes to work with the boxing. He doesn't throw many kicks. Javier Reyes, he defended all of Reyes' takedowns very well, especially in the second round, and then he just eventually knocked out Reyes with his better striking. And that's a similar matchup to this, because Johns is a constant wrestler. He doesn't really have great striking. In fact, the way that I would almost say that he strikes is he, avoids avoids striking. I don't really know how to describe it, but he just jabs from range and he just kind of shuffles his back against the cage the whole time. So I feel like if Lerryan Douglas is as good at boxing as what I think he can cut off the cage. I think he can pressure Johns forward, and I think he eventually can land a big shot to knock out Elijah Johns. So that's why I'm picking Douglas. He is the underdog here. He is plus 125. Johns is a really good wrestler, and he's going to constantly shoot takedowns because that's all he does. But I think there's a very significant striking advantage in the Douglas side, and I'm willing to roll the dice on what I believe is a very live underdog in this matchup. So I'm picking Douglas to win this matchup, and I'm going to pick him to win by knockout. Let me know what you think in the comments below. 12-minute video, only 5 fights, I do understand, but I understand busy. I genuinely am. With that said, I'll see you guys in the next video, which will very likely be the UFC Saudi Arabia predictions.